Thank you.
Okay, the committee will now move to our next witness who's joined us online, I can see there. I now welcome Ms Lindsay Gorman, joining via video conference from Washington DC. As was noted in your invitation, people giving evidence outside of Australia are not protected by parliamentary privilege. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Lindsay Gorman. I'm the Senior Fellow for Emerging Technologies at the Alliance for Securing Democracy.
Thank you very much. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, after which the committee members will ask you questions.
Thank you, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to address you on the evolution of foreign interference on social media and specifically the PRC's influence operations. Social media remains a key front of authoritarian, asymmetric influence operations in democracies. Today, at the Alliance for Securing Democracy, we track over 1,400 overt official diplomatic and state media accounts from China, Russia, and Iran. At the same time, social media is best understood as one element in a broader toolkit to influence and interfere in democratic institutions and to control and weaponize the information environment. These low-cost operations exploit a fundamental asymmetry in the way democracies and autocracies view and engage with information. Democracies depend on a free exchange of information that empowers citizens to make decisions to select their representatives and engage in political discourse. Authoritarian regimes, by contrast, view information as a threat to state authority if allowed to flow freely and as an instrument of social control if weaponized deftly. I will focus my remarks today on three key trends: the evolution of PRC tactics and engagement on social media, new platforms and new threats, and new technologies and risks. First, on the evolution of China's influence operations. Over the last 5 years, PRC diplomats and state media outlets have flocked to social media to spread China's message to the world, increase its discourse power, denigrate the United States and the international world order, and position itself as an alternative democracy. Three key geopolitical events have accelerated the development of Chinese influence on social media. First, the 2019 Hong Kong pro-democracy protests prompted a significant influx of Chinese diplomats to Twitter. For months, they worked to discredit the protests and to frame the CCP's national security law and subsequent arrests as proportionate. Second, starting in early 2020, Chinese diplomats and state media went into overdrive to shape global discourse on the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, China's wolf warrior diplomacy grew, replete with conspiracy theories over the pandemic's origins, as well as attacks on politicians perceived as threatening China's core interests, such as the future of Taiwan or human rights abuses in Xinjiang. AUKUS is one such issue that draws consistently negative PRC messaging on social media, accusing the agreement of destabilizing regional security and encouraging nuclear proliferation. Third, Russia's war in Ukraine and the growing rapprochement between Beijing and Moscow has seen a mirroring of narratives and a two-way amplification between the countries on social media. As tech platforms have sought to limit the reach of Russian state media, Chinese counterparts have acted as a conduit for Russian narratives, blaming NATO aggression, hyping up Russia's resistance to Western sanctions, and minimizing Russia's invasion. This Sino-Russian convergence in the information space is indicative of a more expansive cooperation, including on technology and internet governance in the No Limits Partnership. On new platforms and new threats, namely TikTok, the global rise of TikTok presents two intersecting and overlapping national security concerns: that of data security and algorithmic manipulation. The United States, UK, and Australia have all banned TikTok on government devices for reasons of the former, and debates continue over the prospect of foreign influence on the platform. Our research has found that despite the professed separation between the CCP and TikTok, PRC diplomats and state media accounts have gone to bat for TikTok with messaging campaigns designed to paint the app in a benign light, hype up TikTok's popularity and the consequences of a ban, denigrate the US political system as hostile to business, and portray criticism of TikTok or China as xenophobic, often drawing on familiar tropes. We also found that 78 Russian state media accounts on TikTok had accumulated more than 319 million likes. In short, they were more popular on TikTok than the New York Times. The scope of PRC influence operations raises foreign influence concerns as TikTok becomes more and more a site of political discourse in democracies. TikTok has reportedly suppressed content unfavorable to the Chinese Communist Party and spied on journalists reporting on the company. Social media recommendation algorithms are inherently opaque in how they promote or demote content to users. This lack of transparency can provide an avenue for foreign influence on social media to go undetected. TikTok's heating button, for example, reportedly allows employees to manually make specific content go viral. If the CCP were to direct TikTok to heat particular content, it would be extremely difficult to discern this manipulation. And lastly, on new technologies and new risks, with generative AI, disinformation, and distrust. Finally, the rise of ChatGPT and large language models, as well as image generation services such as Midjourney and DALL-E, provide new avenues for the automation of disinformation on social media. Deepfake images, video, and text can enable automated propaganda, but the rise of content that looks plausible but is not necessarily true also runs the risk of undermining broader trust in the information environment that is critical for quality information to flourish in democracies. As democracies contemplate regulation on AI, restoring trust in the information environment and guarding against authoritarian information manipulation should be at the forefront of these conversations. I offer the committee 3 recommendations. First, join with Democratic allies and partners to develop a comprehensive framework for addressing the threats posed by authoritarian internet apps and critical information infrastructure. Given Australia's strong work on foreign interference, it is naturally poised to take a leading role in these efforts. Second, develop legislative or policy frameworks for AI that promote trust and target harms, including the threat of authoritarian interference using AI. And third, invest in the adoption of content authenticity frameworks that allow non-manipulated information to look qualitatively different from manipulated information, as well as other democracy-affirming technologies such as privacy-preserving AI. I look forward to your questions and continuing engagement with the committee on this matter.
Ms Gorman, thank you very much for that opening statement, which covered a lot of very relevant ground to the committee and issues we've been canvassing with other witnesses so far. I just want to highlight, I know you're not appearing in this capacity, but I just want to highlight your professional background, which includes working for the Biden White House and working for Senator Warner, a Democrat in the Senate. The reason why I mention that is to demonstrate what I think you can speak to, which is in the United States, this is a non-partisan issue, a bipartisan issue. There's concern across the political spectrum about these security issues, in particular in recent times in relation to TikTok. Is that a fair summary?
It absolutely is. And I would add, I was honored to work with Australian colleagues during my government service. But yes, in Washington, D.C., we've absolutely seen a bipartisan agreement on the threats of TikTok, both from the data security perspective and from the CCP influence concerns. I'm really interested in your perspective, therefore, on the potential or likely pathways in US policy to tackle these challenges. There's obviously a number of competing pieces of legislation now before the Congress. Senator Warner's Restrict Act, a House Republican bill to ban TikTok outright, plus initiatives by the administration potentially to force ByteDance to divest TikTok, and of course we've also got Project Texas. I'm interested in your assessment of the likelihood of any of those particular policies being adopted and your view on which is going to be the most effective in dealing with that problem. Sure. Well, I'll definitely start with your second question first on which would be the most effective. I definitely think that a forced divestiture is really the way to go here. That will be the most effective. We can't ignore the fact that TikTok is incredibly popular, not just in the United States, but around the world. We have 150 million users on TikTok, and in some way the TikTok problem, which has become something of a debacle, is the result of the fact that we were late to the game in addressing the national security concerns around TikTok when it burst onto the scene in 2018 and 2019, when we started raising concerns about this data security and propaganda and algorithmic influence. And as a result, TikTok has grown in its user base and become a part of our information environment. And that makes it very, very difficult to contemplate something like a ban. So that is why it's my view that a forced divestiture whereby the concerns could be partially mitigated by the removal of TikTok's Chinese ownership by ByteDance would allow TikTok to keep operating in democracies without that overwhelming threat of foreign influence and interference. Now, I think I'm less sanguine on our ability to achieve that alone as the United States, because this has been a process that's been ongoing for now 3 or 4 years. Yep. And we have significant concerns on the ability to actually force ByteDance to sell TikTok. And that's why you've seen a number of legislative proposals that would give, for example, the Commerce Department in the Restrict Act more authorities to potentially ban TikTok or other apps like it. And you've seen action even at the state level in the United States because I think of this really delayed process at the federal level. But one of the things we would definitely stress is that we need this comprehensive framework, whether it's the Restrict Act or something that's done sort of at a multilateral level, so that we can get ahead of these threats before they become the one of the most popular apps in the country and in the world, and we can address them head on before getting into the scenario that is not a great one that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really well put. Obviously, the biggest roadblock to forcing ByteDance to sell TikTok is that the Chinese government is unlikely to agree to permit it and may, in fact, attempt to prevent it. If we get to that stalemate, what do you think is most likely to happen there, and what do you think is most preferable to happen there?
Well, most preferable, I think, would be if it's not just the United States acting alone in trying to force this kind of action on TikTok. When we get to the level of nation state actors, it should not be the United States versus China over TikTok. But I think there's a role for international pressure here. If the United States is forced into a position of ban TikTok because they can't sell it or just allow it to keep operating, that's not a good position for any country to be in. But if more and more countries start raising the same concerns, then I think a divestiture becomes less deleterious to ByteDance, and there's a chance that China could accede to it. Without that kind of international pressure, I certainly hope that a divestiture would be accomplished, but I'm also recognize the realities that China has said that is not something that it will support or potentially even allow. So we may be faced with a situation where the United States says, here are the conditions for operating in the United States, and TikTok could decide to continue operations or not. I think some of these bans that we've seen are definitely going to be challenged on First Amendment grounds in the United States, and it's anyone's guess whether they'll uphold and go through the courts.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of the Chinese government's objection to the sale of TikTok kind of proves the point that it is recognised as an asset or a tool of the Chinese Communist Party. It would be hard to understand why TikTok itself as a company would object to being sold to a non-Chinese owner, given that they already argue that they're not controlled by the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party, that they're independent, that they only operate in Western countries. It would be hard to understand why they would object to it, unless, of course, they do value their connection with their Chinese parent company and all the benefits that flow from that. I'll share the call with other members of the committee, and then I might come back if there's some time at the end. The Deputy Chair, Senator Walsh. Thanks, Senator Shoebridge. Just one quick follow-up question from me arising out of Senator Shoebridge's questions. I agree with him that part of the solution is going to be a comprehensive response that applies to all platforms. But I think it's instructive to look at what's happened in Europe in recent times in relation to TikTok. The European Union GDPR is kind of generally recognised as the most advanced or most robust privacy protection framework in the world. And yet, despite already having that in place for many years, they've still had to take specific action in relation to TikTok. In the case of government users' devices, the European Commission has banned it, and many national governments covered by the EU GDPR have also banned it, France and Denmark and various others. That does demonstrate that this is as you say, not an either or, it's a both. We need kind of a robust framework which applies to everyone, but we also need to recognise the heightened risk posed by some applications, particularly those headquartered in authoritarian states, that also need direct action targeted to them as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And on the government bans, I think that was really born out of my concern, number one, on data security. We know that China and Russia, but especially China, have very active espionage campaigns against liberal democracies to steal information, both in the traditional national security sense and also in the corporate espionage sense. And so it frankly seems like a no-brainer to ban not just TikTok, but any app that's based in an authoritarian country on government devices. That seems like just such a huge security risk from a cybersecurity and data security perspective. That's, I think, a separate question, though a related one to these broader concerns of foreign influence and propaganda and algorithmic selection and information that apply to the broader public. So that's I think, precisely one example of where we can't just treat all platforms always equivalently, despite the need for this broader framework that can address all platforms.
I also take Senator Shoebridge's point that a strategic stake or investment from someone associated with the royal family in Saudi Arabia in Twitter or their national kind of pension fund does provide an avenue or an opportunity for potential influence. And if that was borne out and proven, then that would be very concerning and would have to address it. But nonetheless, there's still, I don't think we should draw a false moral equivalence between, WeChat or TikTok on the one hand and Twitter on the other, because it's not just a potential avenue for influence, it's an actual avenue for influence we've seen on those platforms, which are headquartered in authoritarian state versus Twitter, which is headquartered in a liberal democracy subject to the rule of law and all the checks and balances that come with that in the case of Twitter.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are sort of different aspects of influence and ownership, and I think one can argue that they apply in different ways to different circumstances. For example, if you're concerned about a foreign election interference, then you might be much more concerned about a platform headquartered in a country that has demonstrated an interest in influencing elections and democracies. If you are more concerned about data espionage, you might also be more concerned about that former category. But just being headquartered in a liberal democracy does not mean that there couldn't be an overwhelming ownership influence. I don't know that we've seen that yet, but that's something that I would be concerned about too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is a potential risk we need to be alive to. But one other difference is Twitter, because it is headquartered in the United States, is not subject to, for example, the 2017 National Intelligence Law of China, which TikTok and WeChat are subject to. And so that's a very direct means of control that the Chinese government has over those applications that the Saudi Arabian government does not have over Twitter. It might have an indirect opportunity for control, but it doesn't have that direct control legislatively.
Yeah, certainly from the data security perspective, that's exactly right, and also the protection of courts in a democracy. In China, there isn't this independent judiciary that can say, well, no, that isn't a valid request for data from a social media platform, whereas, yes, a company that's based in a liberal democracy has that independent judiciary check when it comes to social media platforms. So yeah, these are definitely different scenarios, and that's why we really need something that will spell out some of these and really get at what's the risk in whether it's the ownership, whether it's the influence, whether it's the place that it's headquartered. I think the Prague proposals on 5G internet security are a fantastic starting point for this kind of legislative development, which does identify countries of origin while also trying to promote standards that apply to any internet platform.
Ms. Gorman, thank you so much for your time this evening, Washington DC time. We're grateful for you joining the committee and assisting us with your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
The committee will now suspend. We will resume at 10:30.